Smarter lawyers lead to smarter legal departments, law firms, and client-law firm relationships. But how do the best departments measure their performance? A starting point is the quality of output produced from the cost inputs. Legal outputs are coverage, compliance, and client satisfaction. The cost inputs are headcount and the net costs, which is the real-world total cost of lawyers, plus any liabilities, fines, or penalties incurred as a result of inadequate output. This groundbreaking holistic process reveals different patterns of performance and opportunities for improvement. How does your legal department compare with the best? And where can it improve? Let's find out.
Any process of improvement starts with us and our fellow team members as individuals. In order for any department, organisation or law firm to progress, its people must be progressive, their talents maximised and their potential fulfilled. And one important aspect of personal performance is how we balance our left and right brain disciplines, the data-driven, logical process approach, and instinct, empathy and creativity, how we combine hard data with soft skills. When we're fulfilling our potential, then the legal departments and law firms we work in are better equipped to succeed. But they have their own distinct challenges and paths towards improvement, and we're focusing here on the law department aspect. And when both the legal department and law firms are more effective, then the relationship between the two becomes mutually beneficial and profitable. True win-wins with better work quality at lower net cost for the client and yet higher profitability for the law firms that are doing the right thing. This is the smarter law paradigm, from emotional intelligence to artificial intelligence, transforming busy lawyers into business leaders. In achieving this since 2007, we've synthesized world-class transformation processes such as Six Sigma, Agile, and Design into one high-level methodology that has universal application. Ask, analyze, and act. If there's one thing that decades of transformation and leadership experience has taught, is that the most sophisticated and complex of challenges, journeys, and projects can be achieved through these three fundamental disciplines. But it does require rigorous discipline. As the businesses we represent apply management and improvement processes to all aspects of its cost structure, productivity, and profitability, the legal functions also need to show that these can also be undertaken by us rather than to us, starting with defining our challenges and goals by asking who are stakeholders and what do we need to achieve for them. Here's a selection of the typical questions we ask in order to meet the needs of our stakeholders. As you know, the stakeholders of our legal functions include our internal business clients, shareholders, customers, regulators, and our own legal team members, of course. These are the typical challenges that we are asked to meet, often simultaneously. Now, your own questions and challenges may vary, but I'm sure you'll recognise many of these. One reason I say that is because we've asked you. Since 2010, we've held over 100 workshops with thousands of lawyers from San Francisco to Shanghai, where we have asked their key challenges, put them up, as you can see here, then worked through the analysis and action stages in real time. It's one of the services Smarter Law Solutions offers. The role of legal leadership sometimes seems isolated and unique, as though we're the only ones with our particular problems. But what our consulting clients and workshops have shown is that, one, there's nothing new under the sun, as it were. Two, many challenges are common throughout different legal jurisdictions, countries and cultures, and even though that's hard sometimes to believe. And three, there are solutions, smarter solutions. However, even though the questions asked may be similar, the permutations of analysis and action may well be unique to your business, as this process will show. The next stage, having asked and defined your challenges and goals, is to analyze how you're currently performing in each of those challenges and how far away you are from your goals. The legendary business principle remains true. If you can't measure it, you can't manage it. And for us lawyers, it's particularly vital to balance our right brain skills of instinct, judgment and experience with left brain metrics, data and analytics. One doesn't replace the other, but those questions that we ask require both skill sets to answer. So turning to specifically in-house legal departments, one of the 4 elements of the smarter paradigm, the analysis of how they're performing comprises 2 fundamental elements: the cost of its inputs versus the quality of its outputs. All products and services, including those that your own business produces and those that you purchase, come down to these universal criteria: what goes in and what comes out. So let's take each of those 2 in more detail, starting with costs. Smarter Law Solutions has access to an unrivaled worldwide data bank of legal department benchmarks, which provide an objective comparison with your company's peers and competitors. Having asked questions such as, how do we show and improve value, do more for less, become a profit, not a cost center, these benchmarks analyze your current performance, and in doing so, provide the demonstrable actions needed to achieve the goals you defined in that ask phase. The peer and competitor comparisons can be narrowly tailored by us to match your industry sector, revenue size, country, and international footprint to provide a true like-for-like comparison. Yes, most clients tell us that they are unique, and that is always subjectively true. However, objectively, you also know that customers, investors, regulators, and even employees changing jobs make direct comparisons between your own enterprise and another one. We all operate in some form of competitive market, and so an objective analytical comparison is always being made. So let's look at a real-life example. Here, the 2 benchmarks being analysed are amongst the most instructive: external spend on law firms as a percentage of business revenue, and the number of internal lawyers per billion of business revenue. These benchmarks are particularly useful because they also show the balance between make versus buy. Legal services provided internally by the in-house department versus those purchased externally. We'll analyse later how not all legal services can or should be entirely made internally or bought externally due to the nature of the work. But let's have a look here at this example of the performance of a real company, which, as you can see, is in the technology and services sector with annual revenues between 5 to 10 billion. Here, this client's external law firm spend is 1.61% of its business revenue, which is approximately 4 times the external spend of its peer median companies, and more than double the highest 25% of its peers. By contrast, its internal staffing benchmark is approximately 1/3 of its competitors' median. The analysis here is that the understaffing internally is leading to overspending externally. It's what we call a false economy model. Companies subjectively think they'll save money by having fewer lawyers on the payroll and end up paying significantly more than they objectively should do because of this inefficient balance between make versus buy. As you can see, this analysis provides proof and a pathway towards the action that needs to be taken, which we'll see later on. So, having seen one example of input cost analysis, let's look at the output that those costs have generated. The most direct, objective way of doing this is by asking the stakeholders who receive the output. This is an example of an online product we provide that you would circulate to your internal key clients to survey the service outputs by the legal function. All successful endeavours have some form of systematic quality feedback loop, not just anecdotes and ad hoc opinions that we naturally pick up along the way and may selectively choose to call client satisfaction feedback, but a more rigorous set of targeted questions asked and results analysed. This is actually our online tool being completed real time by a legal department's internal business client. It only takes a few minutes and can even be done on their phone with this engaging, user-friendly format. Now, what analysis does this survey typically produce? Well, the average internal client satisfaction with the outputs of 725 legal departments across the world currently stands at around 7 out of 10 overall. But let's take a deeper analysis of the internal client satisfaction of the same company whose input costs we benchmarked earlier. For their legal department, the overall internal client satisfaction with its output quality was slightly above the overall average of 7.6 out of 10. Looking at the individual questions, it's instructive to analyse which areas were rated above this department's overall score of 7.6 and which areas were below, as these will give some indication of where our action should focus going forward. Availability, responsiveness, variability of service, and proactivity are all relatively low. And these are not unusual things amongst legal departments. And obviously, those of us running legal departments will often feel that we are being as available, responsive, and proactive as we possibly can be. And we'll even have positive comments to back that up, as we'll see from this example. But this systematic approach provides some overall objective context for our daily experiences. And as you will have seen, those experiences are often driven by the input benchmarks we previously measured. A clear example being that as this legal department's staffing was 1/3 of its peers, then it logically follows that it will be less available and responsive, despite the best efforts of the overstretched legal team members. And for even more context, we can analyse predominant patterns amongst the individual comments submitted at the end of the survey. You'll see the same themes: great individual experiences, but warnings about huge use of external law firms and the stress on internal staff. As you go down the individual ratings, you'll see that perceptions that certain internal business staff are getting good service, but their teams, possibly those who are more junior, are not receiving the same quality outputs, the variability that we saw earlier, and that there is some conservatism in the approach. Issues that are not unique to this client. I have to admit, I had to look up what Rasputitsa was, by the way. That was a new description for an old challenge. So as you can see, the best quantitative and qualitative analysis provides a picture that is rigorous, transparent, and true. You can see how these individual analyses provide a pattern of performance. In this example, the quantitative and qualitative data, the left and right brain factors support each other and provide a powerful case to present to all stakeholders: C-suite, finance, procurement, and our own legal team members, showing the analysis of the questions asked and therefore the actions required to answer them and achieve the agreed goals. These actions must be impactful in the world in which the legal function operates. And that world has two dimensions: the distribution of our legal work across our business and the depth of the legal work that we undertake. This depth occurs and can be force ranked according to the relative legal risk and complexity of each individual item of legal work compared to its relative volume. This disaggregation creates a distinction between cream, core, and commodity within a value chain. The cream being the high-risk, high-complexity issues that are relatively few in number, the bet the farm existential issues as it were, the ones that could make or break a financial quarter or a C-suite executive's career. In contrast to cream, the commodity issues are relatively predictable, similar and simple in substance, but high in volume. Here's how one company ranked some of its legal work. Your value chain hierarchy will be composed differently according to the nature of your business. A gut instinct I had as general counsel was when an executive got a customer complaint on their desk, they'd say, send it to legal. And when that same executive was the subject of an antitrust investigation, and they said, I want legal in the room holding my hand. A very broad distinction between cream and commodity there, if you will. So this requires your own force ranking, because not every item of legal work is the most important and consequential, even though we were taught to treat them as such at law school. The reality requires a degree of rationalization and disaggregation. This process not only applies to the collective legal work demands of a company, but will also apply to a large individual item of work. The value chain of major litigation, for example, will have advocacy as cream and discovery as commodity. Large M&A will have strategy as cream and due diligence as commodity, amongst other things. The process of rationalization is identical even though the outcomes will vary. Yes, even though the questions asked may be similar, the permutations of analysis and action may well be unique to your own business. Now, having done that, we can analyze where our legal resources are working throughout this value chain and for how much. This is a real-life example, and it so happens to be identical to the situation I found when I became general counsel of a major company too. Namely, the internal legal team were very busy and overstretched by being anchored in commodity work and not achieving adequate coverage of the whole hierarchy, particularly not having time to focus on strategic management and proactive processes. Not unusual. Consequently, the law firms filled every gap and at 4 times the effective cost per hour, which you'll notice didn't vary even if the work was relatively low value. Both the depth of legal resources and the make versus buy balance that we discussed earlier were in the wrong place. And this often occurs through an accident of history by happenstance, as most legal functions simply evolve in response to events, rather than through a process of systematic improvement or design. And in this real-life example, as with my own leadership of a certain well-known company, the improvement actions combined several impactful elements. Technology, in this case, matter management and contract production, which paid for itself providing 102% return on investment within a year, but also boosted productivity throughout the hierarchy. And just a brief word about technology, if I may. Too often the legal profession tends to start a hopeful improvement process with the action, namely, how can I use AI? Well, AI is a solution, but it's not the solution. It's one tool amongst a range of actions, as we shall see. Here, legal process outsourcing provides the hands-on legal resource to deal with commodity work and aspects of core work. Then, law firms are deployed, no longer for commodity, and significantly reduced in number as a result of the law firm panel convergence process that Smarter Law has pioneered since 2007 and is now commonplace. Within this, there's a clear distinction, as you can see, in expertise, specialism and cost between core law firms and those dealing with the rarer, bet the farm, make the quarter matters in cream that we discussed earlier. Let's be realistic. When we're dealing with existential legal matters, the cost per hour tends to be the least of our concerns. Such issues are vastly more demanding of specialist expertise and are less price sensitive. And this must form part of realistic actions and improvements. You don't ask a brain surgeon for a discount. Well, not before the surgery anyway. But the requirement for this high-end legal expertise is episodic and not required for the full depth of the legal hierarchy. Now, the final element is the legal team, empowered to focus on the most consequential issues, having been freed up from sheer volume by the resource infrastructure built below it. Clearly, this work is of higher individual value, which tends to lead to the individuals being more valued by the business, improved career prospects, compensation, and client satisfaction. But let's look at the impacts of these actions going right back to where we started, with quality outputs and cost inputs. The right-hand infrastructure here represents double the hours of legal output, a 200% increase in productivity. And yet, as you can see, everything below this line is cheaper from right to left, resulting in a cost reduction of 27%. Real-world, impactful actions. So to summarise, a proven improvement process backed by the most comprehensive benchmarking data of its kind in the world. We've seen this application here to a legal function of an enterprise, asking the questions that these functions face, then the tailored, compelling analysis to answer those questions, resulting in robust, tangible actions through a transparent process that doesn't seek to sell any particular solution, a hammer looking for a nail, as it were. This is a pathway to improvement. And one adopted by numerous companies, legal departments and law firms, used by general counsel and legal operations all the way through to procurement and finance, all seeing a smarter way.